Okay, I think we are good to go. Hi, I think you all know me, but let me introduce myself one more time. My name is Marta, and I'm super happy to be here. This is another initiative that we are doing as a Zagreb EUDC Course. This is going to be a panel on careers and debating and everything in between. I'm not going to be the chair today, but I will be leading this discussion. And next to me, I have some lovely and very diverse group of people. We have Stephen. Stephen is a super fancy lawyer. We have Daniel. Daniel is the CEO and co-founder of Panda Milk, the leading Israeli vegan like milk chocolate. We have Bart. Bart consults companies during organization transformation, and he is a co-founder of the largest debating NGO in Poland. And we have Helena. Helena is a PhD candidate at LSC. I hope I introduced you all properly. Please shout if I didn't, but I think I did. And I would love to introduce myself in like in a professional context. I work in a marketing agency. I'm a social media manager, and I think my intuition for why we kind of need to do this panel was because even though I knew that debating is super helpful in a professional setting, I don't think that I actually knew how to actually present it as very useful to people that are outside of this context. And that's one of the things that I want to talk with my lovely panelists today. So I would love to start with Stephen. And first question is like generally going to be, how do you pitch your debating experience and skills to stand out in your CV, specifically when this is like one of the first jobs that you're applying? And what do you think are some of the mistakes that people very often make when they're applying and they have some debating experience?
Thanks, Marta. Yeah, those are two really good questions, and I'll try not to ramble because I guess there's quite a lot to say. On the first one about how to frame your CV or application, I think just the first disclaimer is there's a tendency to sometimes, and this kind of overlaps with the mistakes as well, is don't use it for everything. Like try and what's really generally helpful is work out whatever job it is you're applying for, what it needs. So, you know, it might need communication skills, it might need team building, it might need like analytical skills, etc., etc. Put that down on a piece of paper, and then have ideally like a different example for each, and use debate for the one where you're kind of struggling for one, because obviously debate ticks so many different boxes. So that's the kind of general disclaimer. In terms of how you then frame it, I think it's important to remember that when you apply for a job, what's respected and valued about debating is not necessarily what we value about debating in the debating community. So that's, you know, things from, you know, what may sound more impressive is not something that's necessarily more credible within the community. Like, I don't know, like breaking at the LSE Open is like very difficult, but it's not necessarily, that's not necessarily going to mean anything in the professional world. But like, you know, finishing top speaker at like a smaller tournament, it can sound, it's easier to comprehend and it might sound more impressive. In terms of then how you frame that experience, I think big picture, you can use that to explain how you're, you know, and you can kind of rattle off, especially in like an interview, if requested, how it's given you a wide range of skill sets. So, you know, ability to work under pressure, see things from different points of view, articulate things logically and clearly, etc., etc., etc. But in CVs in particular, I think you really want to kind of split it depending on how much of your application it's going to be. If if you're just straight out of uni, you haven't had much of a previous job, then there's going to be more of your CV is going to be taken up by debate stuff. But then try and break it down. You know, you might have like speaking and judging in one section, and then maybe break out like CA-ships or all-com kind of roles into like almost something that looks like a job, because in many ways it is, it's just not paid for. So you can split that out, and therefore you're already differentiating between the two things. So those would be my like high level comments on that. In terms of mistakes that people make, I think like the first one and the big one I mentioned already, which is trying to use debate for everything, which there's a real temptation to do that because it is so wide ranging, but you don't want to come across as a one-trick pony. The other thing to be careful of, and this is more, I guess, for like interviews rather than applications, is we're obviously argumentative by nature. and we are used to kind of replying to POIs quickly and like assertively. There's a tendency, I think, for debaters to argue too much in interviews, and also not to really listen to the question. So like to kind of think that the way to impress is to like jumping straight in as you would in like a POI response. Where actually, of course, in an interview, if you're asked a question, I'd always recommend taking 5-10 seconds to kind of gather your thoughts and then providing a more logical answer. So those are my high-level comments. So like, no doubt we'll kind of expand on some of the other points later.
Yeah, I think, as you pointed out, it is super important to actually dissect all of the skills that you have as a debater, because not all of them are applicable in every single setting.
Absolutely.
And for example, since I'm in marketing, and when I wanted to find my first job, I explicitly framed my communication skills as the most important skills. So I did not mention like the ORCOM skills or maybe some other speaker achievements, because that's not that very like important for that specific role and for that specific field. So yeah, I agree. I think that's super important to do. I want to now chat with Daniel, because Daniel started his own company, and that's a kind of typical career path that most people like usually have. So I want to ask you, can you tell us a bit more about that path as a co-founder, and what can you say as a piece of advice for debaters that are maybe thinking into like going to be co-founders, or maybe like thinking about like starting their own company, and can actually like debating skills like if they can help them in that like endeavor?
Sure. So first of all, nice to meet you all. So I would say a bunch of things where I think debating can be helpful in the founding, CEOing of a company in the early stage, but also in later stage. I think there are three major parts in which I see in my day-to-day where my debating skills are applicable. Mostly, by the way, is not the actual speaking part. I think the debate speaking per se is not that useful, but all the other surrounding skills are significantly more. Specifically, I'm thinking about mostly every time we're trying to make a strategic decision and we're trying to really understand like the different possibilities that we have to do different things. The way we strategically analyze the situation is honestly pretty similar to how I would analyze emotion. So like, should we do X is very similar to how we would approach these kind of things. And honestly, many times I would even ask different members of the team to try and convince me the other way around, just to facilitate a better discussion. And the way I would analyze emotion, so trying to weigh different comparatives, trying to understand alternative costs, trying to understand the total benefit and cost of every option, is something that on a very intuitive level happens when you do debate for a long time, and I find very helpful. The other thing is many times when so we have many team members, all of them are very smart people, but many times it's hard for them to identify the exact points in which they disagree with each other. So the ability to identify a specific clash in this environment and to understand what exactly is the dilemma that we're trying to solve and really narrow it down to a very specific question is something that I've found out many times can be the pivotal moment in which many people who like arguing for a long time trying to move forward with a discussion then really understand what is the exact specific thing that they actually disagree on, and then you can sort of harness this intelligence of people and to actually move forward with this questions. And this is something that many people outside of the debating community really don't have a lot of experience doing. So it's not a question or a mindset that many people are used to do in their daily life. And the third thing is really when it comes to pitching. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you're doing a lot of pitching in multiple ways. You're raising money, you're recruiting employees, you're trying to sell your chocolate. And in a sense, running your pitch through debate fundamentals can really improve the result that you're doing. So we actually just a few months ago have done a funding round, and when we structured our pitch, we honestly did it very similar to how you would run a debate case. So this is the kind of resistance or rebuttal that people are going to tell us. This is the weak links and the answers that we're going to have to be able to defend. This is the overarching logic of what we're trying to make. And once we're structuring in this way, and we actually treat it as a full case with an end goal of convincing person X to do Y, then we find that we're much more convincing and we're able to actually achieve our goals. And many times, like, people ask the questions and we already anticipate them asking this exact question because we know this is the kind of weak links in our case. And then we have a strong and convincing answer. And then most of the times it would end up being a much more compelling case overall. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think to some extent, and I see a lot of people expecting that the only way they can get like debating benefits if they have an amazing speaking CV and record that they can then pitch in a CV. But I don't think that's like necessarily the case. As you point out, I think there's like having the debating mindset that you always try to find like pros and cons, and that you're like open-minded for a discussion, and that you're like asking the right questions and are able to identify where do people disagree. I think that's something which is like super useful and something that people can take away, even if you do not have the most like amazing debating CV, or you maybe aren't the most amazing speaker ever. So, but yeah, I think like those skills are super important to like utilize them in a startup also, like, or any other venture that you have. I want to now ask Helena, you are someone who was like in the academia sphere, you then kind of hopped on in the private sector, but now you're back again in academia. How do you think debating skills can help you in that specific area? Because I know that a lot of debaters are actively thinking whether they should stay in academia. Very often, these are people that are like very like driven in this specific sector. So what would be your like advices for them?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's lovely to see some of the people that I haven't seen in a very long time. Some of them due to COVID, but others just because, you know, life happens. So it's great to be sort of back. Well, I would say when it comes to academia, the first and foremost advice that I would have for people is only do it if you really, 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 really want to do it. So oftentimes when people ask me, like, should I do a PhD? I tell them, well, the fact that you're asking me this question is already a red flag of a sort, because it's a very isolating, very slow-paced kind of a job, which clearly, at least up to a point, is somewhat incompatible with debating, because, like, you know, debaters like to be quick, debaters like to change topics, and that's not really how academia works, generally speaking. However, I believe debating is one of the most useful skills that you can have if you want to be an academic. So first of all, as someone who wanted to do a PhD, I also, as part of my application process, had to do an interview. And that's where debating skills really kick in. Like, if you only have a master's degree and you want to like pursue an academic career and you want to do a PhD, what you really need to do is you need to convince your prospective supervisor that you can be a good researcher. But you have to do that at a point when you're really not a researcher. So you need to be able to persuade someone that you can understand what are the key issues, that you can sort of analytically approach them. You also need to say that in a very persuasive, very coherent manner. So from the very onset of someone's attempt to become an academic, debating skills and the way in which you structure a research proposal during an interview is really important. But then as you move further to actually do a PhD, there are various kinds of aspects where debating is useful. First of all, a lot of academia, particularly in social sciences, which is what I used to do, is very similar to debating. You're basically expected to look at an argument, look at the empirical evidence offered in favor of an argument, and think about the issues. What theoretical problems do we have in this argument? What are its shortcomings? How can we respond to it? So that's like the first part. So think of a lot of literature reviews that you do in books and articles as basically rebuttal. Then you have your own substantial argument where you are meant to bring the answer to whatever your research question might be. Think of that as like your extension or your arguments in the opening government and opening opposition. So basically, what you do as an academic is a much deeper and much more focused kind of debating. Then again, there is another aspect of academic jobs, which is clearly job interviews. And I think it is now historically known debaters tend to perform extremely well, not just because they can coherently communicate their own ideas, but also because we generally tend to be very good speakers. But then also another part of the academic job is teaching. So you kind of have to be able to transfer the knowledge, which is again where I think debating skills come in extremely handy. So generally speaking, I think that debating is probably the very base, like one of the most useful things that I have ever done in my life when it comes to my prospects as an academic and also as research that I have done. Another thing that I want to add, and that's where Marta sort of mentioned this already, I find myself now in a position where I'm job searching. So I've almost completed my PhD. I've had my take at macro hedge funds, and then I've realized I'm definitely not into that. So I'm now sort of looking for jobs. And I find myself in this position where I have to think about how to utilize debating when I apply for jobs. And I think Stephen has also touched somewhat upon this. It is very important to always think about what is the specific job that you're applying for, looking for. So for example, one of the say you're considering Facebook. Clearly debating is really important here, but clearly you're not going to be mentioning every single thing that you've done in debating. You're going to be able to, for example, highlight the fact that you've been exposed to various topical issues, that you were able to come up with all sorts of different arguments as to why something is important and why it isn't, which perhaps makes you a credible content policy advisor when it comes to Facebook's general fight to limit the impact of hate speech and stuff like that. So when thinking about how to utilize debating in your job application, think about what your hiring manager is really looking for, and how can you make debating seem compatible with those set of skills. And I believe that you will find that we do all sorts of different things as debaters, and subsequently you're always able to pick something from your debating career, which can be very charming for your future hopeful employer. And the final very quick thing that I want to point out is debating networking. I found that there are many places in this world which sort of operate like small debating cults. Basically, you just go there and there are a bunch of people who used to do debating. So I think that's just another very consequential and utilitarian way to think about debating. But you will be surprised, the macro hedge fund where I worked in particular had a bunch of debaters working there. McKinsey, for example, also quite well known for a bunch of people who used to be debaters. So that's another way to think about it. Chances are there are plenty of places where debaters will be working, and you can always phone them and ask for advice, and they will generally have a very, very nice attitude towards former debaters. So that's sort of my take on how you can utilize debating for your professional career.
Yeah, I think the first thing that you mentioned is type of confidence in public speaking, which is very often something that not a lot of other people outside of this context actually have. And I see that when, for example, I was pushed to do like a client presentation for the first time, that I had like zero fear and felt completely comfortable in doing this. Like, because we are so numb to any fear of public speaking after so many years. So I think very often pitching that as something that very often you can utilize in like interviews and like all of those sorts of things. But I think it also can come up with debaters being very often overconfident in their like public speaking skills, that they very often comes with like them not preparing even enough, because you know that you can sway like majority of people that are outside of this context. But yeah, I want to now include Bart. Bart, you have a lot of experience in the like NGO sector, which is to some extent unique to this panel. So can you like briefly share with us how can debating like help you in this area as well? But also another question: how big do you think the market in Poland, but in general like Europe, is for like NGOs like which specifically focus on debating, right? Because I do not know for a lot of examples of this NGO, so I'm very interested in how you can actually monetize this and make debating as your like full career.
So when it comes to NGOs, I think that it's not that very specific case when we are looking at enterprises, when we are looking at law firms or academia. I would like to very much follow up on what Daniel already said, because you know, doing NGO is not doing a volunteering job. It's probably mostly easily compared to doing a social enterprise, really. So you basically need all the skills that are needed in an enterprise, but you apply those skills in very different manner, or maybe to different problems. You don't produce chocolate, you produce social impact most of the time. So whether it's strategizing, whether it's pitching, whether it's evaluating projects, or whatever that might be, in each of these activities that are done in NGOs, debating is very useful. I would say that the biggest competitive advantage that debating gives you is in the pitching part, because I don't know how it is in your countries, but in Poland, if you are not funded by some local Rockefeller and you have like shitloads of money, basically every NGO is striving for cash. It's like nearly on the survival rate. So whether you are successful in pitching can make a difference whether you exist or you are not existing. And a lot of people who go into NGO career, they are very passionate about what they do. And passionate people can move people and just somehow draw them to you. But I don't think that it's a skill very useful when you are pitching to investors or you are pitching to larger foundations that distribute funds. There you need to present a very coherent case, a case that has a clear impact, that you have a plan around it, that is very comprehensive and compelling as well. So as in a startup pitch, you basically need to show that it's worth your money, rather it's like a very touching on the heart or whatever that might be. So I think that in this aspect, debating is very important because you look at things differently. You are not very much, this emotional person who just believes that this cause is worth funding. You are a person who knows that the cause is worth funding and knows how to distribute the money so that there is the largest impact possible applied in the outer world. So I would say, don't look at an NGO as a place of do-gooding. Look at it as a social enterprise, basically, and try to see how the enterprise skills that Daniel already was talking about, how to apply it in your NGO work. It will always pay out in the same manner. When it comes to the question whether this market is large or small, I think that it's small, but it's developing. So basically, when we were funding our NGO, it was 10 years ago almost. Now it's actually 9. There was like no market for people to do some debating skills training or debating projects or debating interventions in school or whatever that might be. Like there were nearly no people that made money. If they made, it was very like occasional. Somebody gave them money. Just basically, it wasn't a business. Now I can see like 10 people who have some income from debating. I'm not claiming that they are living of debating. Not, maybe a few of them actually are, but it's still a huge change that there is a constant inflow of money. And as they are pitching their next clients, whether it's NGOs or businesses or schools or academia they are working with, like new money are being poured into. So I think that the growth rate is around, I don't know, 50% a year when it comes to the amount of the money that we have in debating in Poland for people to be earned. So I believe that this is a very good moment to enter. 10 years ago, it was, a crazy dream of few people that you can actually make a career out of it. Now, I think that it's more and more a viable solution, and it can be like compared to going to a hedge fund or to starting your own business. You can make a living out of it.
Yeah, I think this is one of the rare good things that COVID kind of brought us. I think a lot more people have got the opportunity now to actually make money online doing debating, either by coaching or judging. I know that I earned a tremendous amount of my income through judging at one point, and that only happened because it was online. But I assume this is a trend which is going to expand also in the NGO sector. I have another question for Steven, but if anyone else has an answer to it as well, please hop on. I think we kind of touched upon that very often. The mistake that debaters make in the interview phase is that they are very often over argumentative. But what do you think are the mistakes that happen when a debater firstly and fresh out of uni comes into the workforce, especially in a corporate setting, as the like law is?
Yeah, so again, really interesting to ask, because what I found fascinating in the careers I've been in since I left uni is debating actually has like a mixed reputation, in that it's respected in terms of the skill set for the reasons all of us have discussed already. But to be frank, a lot of people think debaters are not very pleasant, and I was surprised by that, in that I knew that we knew that was a problem. I didn't necessarily realize that was like widely appreciated. And that's it. It's actually important to know that, because if you go into an environment and that, there is fears, so like people know you did debate, right? So for certain people, it's any environment you're in, either because you've made a big deal out of it or people have either Googled you or whatever, people know that you may know you're a debater, right? Or it's come up in a conversation or something, and then you have that tag. So it's important to kind of work out quite early whether that you suffer from that, because that itself can affect how people kind of view you and how you have to then consciously react. But I think what's true for everyone, I think once you start, well, mistakes that I certainly made and I've seen made by other people who do debate is, one, we often don't take a view, because in a lot of businesses and environments, and I know for sure, I can see Daniel nodding, I can imagine in particular in like when you run a business, you need to take decisions, right? You can't sit on the fence. And something I was guilty of in the past and still am to a certain extent is over considering. So, on one hand, there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. I'm so good at responding. Generally, we're very good at responding to arguments that we then have like analysis paralysis, right? Like you can just keep going without actually taking a view. And generally speaking, in people want you to consider the position, but they want you to take a view, whether you're a lawyer or a consultant or a teacher or a business person, whatever it is, you need to make decisions, you need to take views. So one thing I would definitely say is don't fall into that trap. Don't kind of just keep thinking of responses, like acknowledge what the problems are, but say, let's be on balance, I think X because of Y, right? So more like when you give a judging adjudication, right? Like, there are different sides to it, but you have taken a view for a particular reason. The second one is we have a tendency of talking too much, right? So in meetings in particular, and when especially if you're a junior member, but I think this is true for like senior people as well, you don't want to be the person who talks the most in a meeting. It's rarely productive. What I found to be very helpful, and just to be clear, I was very guilty of this in the past. And I remember I was lucky enough to like go on this leadership academy scheme where they filmed a group exercise and they played it back. It was awful. I hate like viewing myself on camera. So it was an hour, right? The exercise. And then when they played it back, it was very obvious that I was talking for like a large part of this hour in a way which I thought was helpful, but clearly wasn't. So that was a really harsh but important exercise for me, a lesson for me to learn. And what I do now is when I go into a meeting, and I also do this in the meeting, I'm always conscious of like, what is it? What do I want to say the most? I have like a priority list essentially, right? So if there's an hour-long meeting and there's 10 people in the room, and I know that the most important thing I want to talk about is agenda item 3, I will rarely contribute to agenda item 1 and 2 if there's lots of people talking, because in my view, I'm giving up my speaking time on an issue or 2 issues that I don't really care about or which are landing in my favor anyway, right? And then that means that when it gets to issue 3, I've kind of saved up my time. It's legitimate for me to speak for like a minute straight because I haven't said anything, right? Because other people aren't going to be like, oh, this guy's like been talking the whole time. Equally, in a discussion, again, that kind of like meeting environment, it's very helpful with our skill set to have like the last say. So I will let other people talk and I will be making my notes, right? And grouping them together, like using like going back to my like whip speaking days. Then when you contribute, first of all, you benefit because other people may have dealt with the like easier bits already, right? They may have already been refuted, but it also enables you to kind of go, right, appreciate where everyone's coming from. I broadly agree with X and Y. However, the real issue is Z because blah. And you can't do that if you go in straight away or you go in number 2, right? That isn't always going to work, but that's my default. And for me, it's worked very well because over time you build up a reputation as someone who, when they speak, you listen to because it's considered, it's fair, and they're not just talking for the sake of talking. So those are 2 like big things I would mention because there are strengths as debaters, but they very easily can fall into weaknesses.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think Helena has something to add, and then I'm going to include like Daniel and Bart.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing which might sound trivial, which is, and I'm so guilty of this to date, we just talk too fast for normal people. Like we go into interviews and it's just like the speed of light at which we speak. And I don't notice it when I do it, and I know that I do it, but I know that we as debaters tend to do it because I've judged a tournament over the summer after a very long time of not judging and just like interacting with non-debating folks. And we just speak too much, and it's extremely off-putting for a lot of people. So I think in line with what Stephen was saying, that we talk too much, I also think we talk too fast, which is probably related one to another. But it's just another thing which I think when you go to the interview and with all the advantages that we have in terms of how structured we are and that we can make persuasive points and that we can just about make anything sound persuasive, we also talk too much. So that would be another thing, just like everything we want to say twice as slow. That would be my very crucial advice to anyone interviewing for a job anywhere in basically any sphere of life, I would say.
Yeah, I think just like one more thing to add from my own experience is I think we very often forget that people aren't only persuaded with like rational arguments. Especially if you work in not so strict corporate setting, and that very often the key to like persuading people is actually using your like emotional intelligence and some arguments that you would never run in debating because you know that the judge would never buy them. However, people in real life to some extent do buy them. And I think that we very often tend to forget this aspect of persuasion, specifically when we need to convince our coworkers to do a specific thing or to get aligned with us on a specific issue. So that's something that I kind of noticed with myself. So Daniel, do you have something to add on this question? And if not, I do have another question for you.
So I'll add something and then you can ask. I would say that something that I see also that is important in meeting dynamics and decision making in general is I think because we're very trained in taking any side of an issue and being able to provide a persuasive argument, it's very easy to think you have the right answer. Like it's very easy to fall in love or just see a specific side of the argument and start to engage in it. And because you have the ability to actually persuade, you find yourself in a position in which you are the defender of this line, and you might even win, which is not necessarily a good thing in this kind of scenario. So I find myself many times have to restrain myself in trying to persuade someone in a specific point because I know that I might succeed. Like I might be able to take the strongest case of this specific side, which isn't necessarily the right thing to do. So I liked what Stephen said about trying to a little bit detach and see the overview of the situation and not try to engage in a specific side, and sort of being able to show what everyone is on and what is the discussion is about, and try to even provide counter to specific arguments in the room, and not push my point too strongly forward, because this is something, especially, and I see it particularly when I'm in the boss position. So I have also like the fact that I make the decision in the end, which means that if I push toward a specific direction, then I basically destroy any dynamic, any fruitful dynamic that I might want to see.
Yeah, that makes full sense. I think Bart also wanted to add something on this.
Yeah, sure. Like, you know, I believe that through debating, we are taught that word operates in a meritocratic fashion. So basically, who has the better argument wins, and that the winner can be declared clearly to some extent. And when it comes to big organizations, it really rarely works that way. So big organizations are most of the time political systems, not meritocratic systems. So it's not about who has the best argument or who can argue in the best manner. It's more of most of the time about who can show the allyship to some idea or to some person, or who can make someone feel good or be seen in a better light with his project, his idea, or his work. So with our debating skills, I believe that we too much engage in this meritocratic argumentation, like trying to show that the points can be refuted, or there are some like weak elements of the case that somebody is presenting. Most of the time, it's not necessary in the corporate world. It's better to like stay silent and to point to the points that you really have to make, that will make your position in an organization more beneficial in the future. You have more power in the future, basically. So it's not about winning arguments, it's about getting more power to you in the future. So if winning arguments is helpful in doing that, that's fine. But most of the time, it's actually not. It's actually making you be seen as like an arrogant person, or somebody who needs to put their stamp on an issue each and every time. It doesn't help you at all, or to very much extent. So like try to see that organizations are not debates, and basically you should not be debating that much when you are working in a big organization. You rather be using specifically, like tactically, the skills that you learn through debating in organizations.
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes people in like a business setting get convinced with a good argument that you present, but sometimes even if they see that they are not right, they will still not be on your side because you made them feel so bad about their opinion in the first place, which is very often awful. No one wants to hear that. So I think it comes down to just being emotionally intelligent, which very often debaters do not prioritize that highly, if I can put it mildly. But yeah, I have like now I have a question for Daniel, and then I'm going to go back to Steven and Helena. So Daniel, I think when a lot of debaters think about like becoming like CEOs or like being founders, they're very often extremely afraid of this, right? We all know that the rate of these companies like going under is very huge. Very often this comes with a huge risk. So what would you say to someone who is fresh out of uni, who is maybe thinking about doing some of these things? So like, what are the advices and factors that they should take into account when they're thinking whether they should become a founder?
So first of all, they should be afraid. That's a good feeling to have in this kind of setting, because I mean, okay, just putting into context, it is a hard thing to do in many aspects. There is risk involved, and the possibility that you won't succeed is significant, and it's even the probable scenario, even if you are extremely smart and dedicated. So I would say that I think the best advice, honestly, is not necessarily a business advice, and it's more of a get to know yourself type of advice. I would suggest anyone that think that being an entrepreneur is the right path for him or her to find a way to experiment with the notion of doing this and seeing if this actually is the right thing, because there is a lot of glamour around being in this position. And for some people, it would do great because they would love the influence, the position, the ability to see the thing that they dream of come to fruition. And many people would simply suffer. And it's absolutely fine to accomplish yourself in other places and not be a a startup founder or a business founder, and it doesn't mean anything bad about you if you don't. And so sort of to shatter the notion, this is like the only way to be successful, which I don't think anyone have, but some people do have this idea. And I would say experimenting with it, maybe start something on the side, maybe start joining something. I actually started my entrepreneurship more similar to Bart. I started in social entrepreneurship and NGOs, and then I moved on to business, but it's very similar in terms of the kind of emotional struggles and the difficulties you have to face as an entrepreneur. I would say find the places in which you can experiment with being an entrepreneur on a small scale, on something that you can afford to risk, and on places that if you fail is not that terrible, and figure out if you enjoy the ride, like if you can actually have this highs and lows and this emotional train wreck most of the time. And if you do, then great, do it. I mean, I think it can be hugely rewarding, but do it after you sort of investigated this on your own for a while.
Yeah, I agree. I think like experimenting before you are decided on a specific path is probably the best idea. On the same note, I have a question for like Steven, Helena, and Bart. I think a lot of debaters, because they are like often intellectually curious about a lot of different topics, they have an incredibly hard time finding a specific area that I actually want to work in, especially when very often this comes like with the trade-off of like whether we should pursue our passion or whether we should pursue the path which will give us like a very huge salary and incredible like benefits and perks. Yeah, so what are your advices to like uni graduates that are still thinking like what is the specific career path they should take, and what do you think about the trade-off of like passion versus very often huge salaries or like very often other perks that like people can have? So maybe we can start with Steven.
Yeah, so I gotta own up here. Like I always have struggled with that question. I think I will struggle with that question for the rest of my life. And I think honestly, like for me, part of my kind of development is trying to accept that. I think in reality, we're all in a privileged position that we can probably do lots of different things, and no job is going to be perfect. And you know, there'll be things in Daniel's job that I'm envious of, but then you know the kind of stability that some of us have in our jobs, Daniel, I'm sure you wish you had, and you know vice versa, etc. So there's no perfect job, and I think that starting point is really helpful, because I for a long time kept striving for like, oh, I want a job that pays really well, has great hours, has like great community. I feel so like I'm committing to this social good, etc., etc. Realistically, that's going to be hard. So I think with that in mind, I would say I think there are like three. Of course, there are three. I would probably flag. The first one is to work out what you prioritize in life, and this will change over time. So when I was 22 or so, I really needed to make money. I felt like I needed to, help my parents out with their situation, get myself kind of stable. And therefore, I knew I needed a job that was going to pay pretty well, pretty quick. So that, for example, was influential in me going down, say, like the solicitor path rather than the barrister path, because one was like riskier than the other, say. And, each of us has our own priorities, but it's important to know what those are. So again, like writing them down and then ranking them 1 to whatever, 10, 12, 15 is a quite helpful exercise. The second one is to acknowledge that it's very common nowadays to have different careers and different jobs within a particular field. So don't feel like your first job in particular, or second or third, is going to be your job for like 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Realistically, that's not going to be the case. And if you can bear that in mind, that can help you decide what job to take at what point in time. So for example, your earlier jobs might not be, you might know for sure that's not going to be what you want to do long term, but it might open other doors for you down the line. It might give you certain skill sets. It might give you money in the bank. It might give you contacts. It might give you a qualification, et cetera, et cetera. So I've, again, found it quite helpful to kind of think in the short to medium term rather than thinking medium to long, which is my kind of like default way of thinking. And then the third point is in respect of your question about passion. I had read some time ago something which I thought was very interesting, which is that passions are, people have a misconception that passions kind of exist inherently, when actually you develop passions by being good at something and like having like developing an interest in it, right? And I was a little skeptical of that, but I have found that to be the case. Like, I'm very passionate about what I currently do, which is like working as a lawyer and as an underwriter. And about 6 months ago, I didn't even know that job existed. So again, this is more of a mindset thing, but I do think that like you can become passionate about something when you get good at it, and it ticks certain boxes, and your general life is quite fulfilled. So I wouldn't feel that one should be under the pressure to kind of go, right, I'm passionate about, say, the environment, therefore I must work in a job that helps the environment. That I think might overly narrow one's decision making.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think especially like lowering your expectations from your first and even second job, I think that's a very useful like psychological tip, because very often those jobs are not going to be your like destination and your goal jobs, right? They're just like entering jobs, which will very often come with huge disadvantages, but you know that you're on a path that you want to be on. But like lowering expectations is super, super important. I think Helena has something to say on this as well.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that, there are a bunch of people who just won't have the ability to choose at a point in time when they're applying. People struggling with certain financial difficulties might just have to choose whatever gives them financial stability. And just for the purposes of saying how I'm thinking about these issues, I'm going to set those groups of people aside and just sort of think about people who can make a choice. And I want to say, like, both come with a cost. And I honestly don't think, and I say this with some experience, I don't think one can really anticipate the trade-offs one is making before you actually enter the game. So I know what it means to take a job that offers very good financial compensation for what you do, but I was nowhere near as able to anticipate certain shortcomings. Equally, I know what it means to choose a career path where financial stability is not crucial and sometimes it's questionable, but it gives a lot of other perks and advantages and joys to life. I would say, I guess it's going to sound very trivial, but it's the lesson that I've learned from my own experience. I think seeking balance is actually key. I think that there is a certain amount of money necessary for just an ordinary average person to satisfy their basic needs and have some joy and financial stability. But I don't think that is the amount of money that a lot of corporations that take away hours and days of your life are actually offering. I think sometimes they offer way too much and we all get in love with the ginormous figure. Equally, I think that there are a lot of jobs for which an individual could be passionate about, but they basically don't offer that financial stability, which I think that makes your life difficult in all sorts of different ways. So I would kind of say, try and find something which you sort of feel comfortable doing for most of your day, at least 8 to 10 hours a day, and something which also at the same time, if possible, offers you enough money to cover the basic needs that you have, but try and avoid the extremes, unless you're really passionate about them, in which case, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. But I kind of think that finding the balance between the two makes the most sense to me. So that's sort of how I would be looking at it. And the kind of motto that I have in my mind is unless you have a vocation, I would say that you work to live, you don't live to work. But if it's a vocation, then it's a completely different topic. But that's sort of the place where I'm coming from when it comes to this topic.
Mm-hmm. I think Bart has something to say on this as well.
Yeah, sure. When you are, as you said, intellectually curious, I believe that most of the time when you choose a career or a job, you think that it's to very much extent limiting. that you set yourself up for a certain career, or you set yourself up for a certain skills development or activities that you have to conduct in your daily job. But actually, it's not true. Like, every job has certain autonomy, and you can somehow craft this job. Basically, you can add different activities that you may do during the job, or you can connect with different people that are not connected to your job during your work hours. You can do a lot of things that at the very beginning you may think that are not possible, but are possible with time. If you think that your job is not is very routine, like, try to seek activities that you may do during your work hours that will make it more random or make it more intellectually curious. You can do it. Like, the research on job enrichment and research on job crafting shows that nearly in every job possible, from like waiter to consultant, everyone has some autonomy, and you can tweak your job so that it fits your curiosity, it fits your needs, it fits your values. So don't be very much obsessed with choosing a job. Be obsessed with making this job for you, fitting it for you, adjusting the job to you, not you yourself to the job. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I agree. I think we often underestimate how much you can actually like customize your own role at the company that you are in by very often just asking to take some duties, maybe asking to like get rid of some other duties that you maybe do not like. But I think to some extent this is important. Like, final question, and I see that Helena has to like,
Can I add
off.
Something?
Yeah.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you as well.
So I think taking all the disclaimers I've said before, I do think that being an entrepreneur is a very good solution if you want to do a lot of very broad things. My day-to-day routine consists of pretty much everything a business does, from marketing to finance to operations to food science to basically everything. And I find myself, I'm not the expert about anything, and I have smarter people than me in my team in their specific area of expertise. But I have the ability to learn and experiment with a huge variety of different topics that are very different from one another. So I think that sort of the jack of all trade type of character is the one that can benefit from this kind of position and this kind of job or career path.
Yeah, I think probably like the worst job for the majority of the waiters, if they have the luxury to choose it, is the one which is like constantly the same with one single task and one single skill. I think very often the way to be fulfilled is to find a job or to like customize it, to have like different skills that you very often need to use and like utilize. But yeah, as the last round of questions, do you maybe have some other additional advices that maybe popped on in your head, like while we were talking about, like what would you say additionally to people that are just like now, like exiting unis or will do that soon?
I would say that you shouldn't be obsessed about showing your debating portfolio and skills. They will shine through anyway. Basically, through what Helena, for example, already said, like, you are very good at speaking. Not many people are. And even during a recruitment interview or during like your first talk with your boss, first presentation or whatever it might be, people will see that you are coherent, that you have a lot of clarity in the way you talk, that you are very thorough in the way you speak. So basically, it will shine through itself. So don't be very much obsessed about like talking to each and everyone that you won an LSE Open or whatever that might be. Nobody will care on one hand. On the other hand, they may not know what does it mean. But what is fundamental, they will see that you have the skills because they are very visible. They are not just very much hidden somewhere and nobody will see, nobody will notice. They will present themselves anyway during the job. So don't be obsessed about like communicating them. Let them speak through the way you speak or the way you argue or the way you like try to develop a proposal or strategize, as Daniel was already saying, or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I agree. I think one more advice that I would have, like while maybe like Stephen and Daniel are thinking, is also to know that your job will not fulfill you 100% and to always have some other additional like things in your life to fulfill any gaps that maybe your job is like leaving behind. But yeah, Stephen, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, Martha, a point you made earlier, which I think is super important, which is that we are, the skill sets we've developed through debate are amazing and they really do help. And, it will give you in any industry, I think, a leg up over anyone who hasn't done it. But at least for me, and I know a lot of my friends who are in debate as well, it does contribute to a level of overconfidence and tendency to not prepare because you know you can react. So when it comes to like presentations and interviews, but also just general preparation of like case studies or like even like having to speak very briefly about something at like a team meeting, etc. I still to a certain extent have to like overcome that default of like, I'm going to be fine, or I can do very well with limited prep, etc. Because the great thing is that you should remember that because that's a really great safety net, right? Reality is you're never going to do terribly in those kinds of tasks because your base level is very high. But what's amazing is that in BP, obviously, we don't get the prep time, right? But in work, you do get the prep time nearly always. So if you have your advanced skill set and you put the prep time in, what you can achieve is like, it can be remarkable. But sometimes you need to remind yourself of that because especially again, like in my like earlier stages of the career, I was relying too heavily on my like abilities rather than preparation.
Yeah, exactly. I think the overconfidence will kill us to some extent in the workforce. But yeah, I see that Daniel probably has something to add on this.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can't agree more with what Steven just said. I think that it's sort of this tendency to be a little bit lazy and to fall on this net is something that I feel as well. And I do want to emphasize that if you do the prep work and you add the skills, then most of the times your ability to be ahead of the curve and like to bring something that is significantly more is remarkable. I mean, we've seen it in our last funding round, and we really got many feedbacks of like this was one of the best presentations we've ever seen and stuff like this, because to take a lot of homework, and we did a lot of homework on this, and debate skills together is something that is remarkable. And so I just want to stress this out because I definitely agree. I'm probably not the best person to ask what to do after you graduate from university because I never have. So I don't have a good answer for this specific type of question. What I would want to just come back to what I said before, which is I think it's a very good time in your life to take a moment to experiment, because later in life, and again, obviously, if you have the option, and what Helena said is true, but I would make the same disclaimer as she did. I think that later in life, it's after you have invested a few years in a specific career and you've already in a place, it's much harder to make a significant change. And this can be probably one of the most significant decisions you're going to make in your life. So taking the time to see if the kind of things that you have in your mind as a dream or the kind of things to aspire to is actually true for you, if you actually enjoy this kind of work. Like, I don't know, take someone who do it and join them for a week, or see how this work is actually in the real world. Because like, I know from my experience that the difference between what I imagine a founder is supposed to do to the fact that like half of my day, it consists of fixing broken chocolate machines with a wrench and a screwdriver, is a very significant disparity. And you have to actually see the work. You have to actually understand what people are doing, what they're struggling with, what is the daily routine is, in order to actually understand if what you have in mind and what the reality is actually true. And I would say that this is, after university, is a good time to sort of experiment and see which way is better for you.
Yeah, it is so hard to know what you love to do until you kind of do it. And I think as a uni graduate, you have so many misconceptions about how specific like roles look like. And I think one tip that can be useful there is to always try and find, and I do believe a lot of debaters are in like different areas, to try and reach out to them and just talk like to them and ask them like, how does their day-to-day look like? What are the biggest challenges in their work? Just so you actually know how a specific industry or like a role looks like, because that's something that I like kind of didn't know before I went into marketing. I had no idea how like the day-to-day actually like, looks like. So yeah, I think that's like a useful tip, like from hindsight, to actually know, and to always, of course, experiment. Okay.
Sorry, Martha, just to add one very quick thing, which I forgot to mention earlier, which is if you're still at university, so you've not yet graduated, one of the best things to do, which is obvious, I think, but like it really needs stressing, is take advantage of the opportunities you can have whilst you're still at university, right? So benefiting from careers department, speaking to other people, speaking to people in debate society, working out what you should be doing, applying for internships and things, because as you and Daniel both said just now, right, like actually experiencing something and seeing and shadowing and stuff is super helpful. And also kind of treating these things seriously. So that like applying for jobs, especially competitive ones, is really time consuming, like putting together the questions or personal statements, interview preparation. And again, going back to that point about like making an effort, I remember I spent a lot of time, like way more time on debate at university than I did on my like actual course, let alone job applications. And that thankfully for me worked out okay, but was really reckless actually. And I, you know, if I look at it now and I'm like, you know, I got very, very fortunate. And not everyone else will be as lucky as that. So, you know, you do need to put the time in, and then you will benefit more than maybe someone else who hasn't got your debate background.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think Bart has probably something to add on this.
I'm not quite sure. I think that Daniel and Steven were very thorough on that manner. So I would leave it in this place.
Amazing. I think that's it for me from like the official questions. I don't see any specific questions in chat from other people. That means that you were like very thorough and very clear to follow. Oh, actually, we do have a question for Daniel. Did you regret not going to college, or do you think there is something you would have learned which would have been helpful in hindsight?
So just to be clear, I did start a degree in the Open University of Israel, which is why I started to do debate. And the Open University is very flexible in terms of how many courses you can take. And I sort of faded out during this. I started doing more and more debate, less and less courses. And at the end of I just decided that I'm actually not taking any more courses. I don't regret it. I think that there are specific things that university is amazing at doing. But for me specifically, and at this point in time, I felt that the knowledge that I need for what I am trying to do is I would say more practical or more directly linked to the kind of challenges that I'm trying to solve. And it would be easier for me to learn it from books, lectures, other people, and not from in the academic field. So I don't regret it, but also it's not like I think that having a degree is a bad career choice if you want to be an entrepreneur. It just turns out this way for me. I don't have any anti-college sentiment or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think to some extent, like the decision to go to college or how many like courses you're going to take is like a very individual thing. I don't think there is like a clear-cut like response whether this is something which is like universally good or not. Well, yeah, I think that's probably it. If we do not have no more questions and anyone else doesn't have like any like closing remarks that you maybe want to share. If not, then I have to say a huge thanks to, or maybe someone wanted to say something. It's always like uncomfortable on Zoom.
Sorry,
Like,
I was shaking my head, but I also leant in, so I gave you mixed signals. I apologize.
Yeah, it's completely okay. I'm always afraid that I'm gonna like interrupt someone. Yeah, but yeah, thank you all for taking the time. I think this was like super helpful to me at least, and I think it is also gonna be to people that were here and to people that are gonna watch this, because we like recorded this and we're gonna post it on our page. And yeah, thank you all for being here, and I wish you all the best luck in your like future careers.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Martha and Matt for organizing. Very much appreciate it. Pleasure.
Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure. If you want to reach out to me, I'll share my email or Facebook, and you can feel free to ask anything.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Okay, talk to you,
So,
and hope to see you soon.
bye.
Thanks, bye.